On day one of the collapse, I made a decision that cut off clean water to 43,000 people. 9 minutes, 9 valve closures. And just like that, 12 million gallons of drinking water belonged to me, one man, alone inside a concrete fortress designed to outlast storms, sitting on the single most valuable resource in a dying world. What I didn't expect was the cost of keeping it. Within 3 weeks, survivors found me. Some of them asked politely. Some of them came with bolt cutters. One of them, a man I let inside my walls, nearly destroyed everything by telling the wrong people exactly how to poison the supply I'd sacrificed everything to protect. And on one night I'll never fully recover from. A man behind a locked steel door looked at me through a slot in the metal and asked me to kill him before he became something else. And I did it the only way a water treatment operator knows how. This is the story of how I rode out the apocalypse inside an abandoned water treatment plant. How I turned isolation into survival, survival into guilt, and guilt into something that might, eventually, resemble purpose. Let me start from the beginning. The first thing I noticed when the water stopped moving was the silence. Not the absence of sound, there was plenty of that in the days after the grid went dark, but the specific silence of a system that had been running for decades, suddenly holding its breath. Pipes that had hummed with constant pressure went still. The massive clarifiers, those slow concrete carousels that had spun sediment out of raw water for as long as I'd worked there, drifted to a halt like dying planets losing their orbits. And in that silence, standing alone on the operations floor of the Harrowfield Regional Water Treatment Plant, I understood something that took most people another 48 hours to figure out. If you control the water, you control survival itself. My name is Oren Massey. I was 51 years old, a process control supervisor at Harrowfield for 19 years. I knew every valve, every bypass, every chemical feed line in that facility the way a surgeon knows anatomy. And when the emergency broadcast cut through my truck radio on a Thursday morning in late October, when the governor's voice cracked mid-sentence and someone screamed off mic before the signal dissolved into static, I didn't drive home. I didn't try to reach my ex-wife in Raleigh or my brother in Asheville. I turned my truck around at the Route 9 overpass, watched the first plume of black smoke rising from downtown, and drove straight back to the plant. Not because I was brave, because I knew something nobody else was thinking about yet. Clean water weighs 8 pounds per gallon. You can carry maybe 4 gallons before your arms give out. The average person needs a gallon a day, minimum, more in stress, more in heat, more if you're running. Every grocery store, every gas station, every house with a tap was about to become a battlefield over something that would run out in 72 hours. But Harrowfield sat on a raw water intake from Lake Morrow. 12 million gallons of reservoir capacity in the clear wells alone. Backup generators with 800 gallons of diesel. A chemical storage building with enough sodium hypochlorite to disinfect water for months. Concrete walls 3 feet thick. A perimeter fence topped with razor wire that had been installed after the 2019 security audit. And this was the part that mattered most. It was 3 miles outside of town, down a service road most civilians had never driven. I had a building designed to be unmanned during storms. A building designed to keep running when everything else failed. And I was quite possibly the only person alive who knew how to operate it solo. The parking lot was empty when I pulled in. Third shift had ended at 6. The day crew, Paulette, Geo, 2 contract operators, should have arrived by 7. It was 7:40. Nobody had come. I used my badge at the main entrance, heard the electromagnetic lock disengage with its familiar click, and stepped into the operations corridor. Emergency lighting only amber strips along the baseboards, casting everything in a dim copper glow. The main SCADA system was dark, which meant the grid feed was already gone. But the generator transfer switch had kicked. I could hear the big Caterpillar diesel rumbling in the mechanical building, that low heartbeat I'd heard 100 times during power outages. I went to the control room first. Habit. 19 years of walking through that door and scanning the banks of monitors, checking turbidity readings, chlorine residuals, flow rates. Most screens were blank now. The one still lit showed error cascades, communication faults with the remote pump stations, pressure warnings from the distribution mains. The system was trying to talk to a world that wasn't answering. I sat down in the operator chair, the one with the cracked armrest I'd been requesting a replacement for since 2022. And I did something I'm not proud of. I pulled up the plant isolation protocol. The one we'd written after 9/11, never tested, buried in a binder nobody had opened in 15 years. Gate valve closures on the main transmission lines. Full hydraulic isolation from the distribution network. It meant cutting off water to every home, business, school, and hospital connected to our system. 43,000 people. I did it in 9 minutes. Closed every outgoing valve remotely, then walked to the two that required manual operation and cranked them shut with the portable actuator. The clear wells stopped draining. 12 million gallons sealed inside my walls. I told myself it was operational prudence. The contamination could backflow from a compromised distribution system. That maintaining reservoir integrity was standard emergency procedure. And technically, all of that was true. But the real reason was simpler and uglier. I was keeping the water for myself, for whatever was coming, for however long this lasted. That was day one. Let me tell you about the 6 weeks that followed. The plant sits in a shallow valley between two ridgelines covered in scrub pine. From the roof of the chemical storage building, a flat concrete slab I could access through a maintenance hatch. I had a sight line to the Route 9 overpass about a mile east and the tree line that screened the service road to the south. For the first 3 days, I watched traffic on Route 9. Cars moving fast at first, then slower as they clumped together, then not moving at all. By day 4, the overpass was a graveyard of abandoned vehicles, their doors hanging open like broken wings. I spent those early days doing what I knew how to do, running the plant. Not treating water for distribution, there was nowhere to send it, but maintaining the stored water's quality. Chlorine residual checks every 8 hours. Temperature monitoring in the clear wells. I ran the backup generator on a conservative schedule. 4 hours on, 4 hours off. Enough to keep critical systems alive and stretch the diesel. I inventoried everything. 680 gallons of sodium hypochlorite. 40 bags of calcium hydroxide for pH adjustment. A maintenance shop with basic tools, a welding rig, spare pipe fittings, a break room with a refrigerator, a microwave, and whatever the last shift had left behind, 3 cans of Dr. Pepper, half a bag of corn chips, 2 frozen burritos that were still cold on day 1. Food was going to be my problem. Water I had in almost absurd abundance. But food I'd driven back to the plant with nothing but my thermos of coffee and a granola bar in the glove box. I had maybe 2 days of calories if I rationed hard. On day 3, I made my first supply run. I waited until full dark, no moon, overcast, and walked the service road south toward the old Millhaven subdivision. It had been half-built and abandoned during the 2008 crash, frames of houses without siding, driveways that led to foundations choked with weeds. But the construction office trailer was still there, and construction crews leave things behind. I found a case of bottled water useless to me, some beef jerky, 2 cans of chili, a half-empty jar of peanut butter, and a sleeping bag that smelled like motor oil. I also found a dead man in the driver's seat of a pickup truck, parked behind the trailer. No visible wounds, no blood. Just sitting there with his hands still on the wheel and his eyes open, looking at something I couldn't see. His skin had a grayish tint, and when I got close enough to check for a pulse I didn't find, I noticed the smell. Not decomposition, something chemical, metallic, like hot pennies and chlorine. I backed away, took my supplies, walked back to the plant in the dark, locked the gate behind me, and didn't sleep until daylight. The radio was my only connection to whatever was happening beyond my fence line. I had a battery-powered AM receiver in the break room and the plant's old two-way VHF system, which I powered up during generator hours. For the first week, I caught fragments, military frequencies with clipped, coded traffic I couldn't decipher. A loop on the AM band automated. No human behind it repeating coordinates for evacuation centers in cities I knew were already burning. And once, on day 5, a civilian voice on an open VHF channel. A woman, her voice frayed to a whisper, saying, "If anyone can hear this, the hospital is gone. St. Andrews is gone. They came through the west parking deck and the doors didn't hold. If you're in Harrowfield, stay away from downtown. Stay away from anywhere with bodies. They're not staying dead." The transmission cut. I never heard her again. I'm not going to pretend I didn't know what was happening. The emergency broadcast had said enough before it died. Aggressive pathological reanimation. Extreme risk of transmission through fluid contact. Shelter in place. I'd seen enough movies, read enough paperwork from the county emergency planning committee I'd sat on for 6 years. I knew what we were dealing with. I just didn't have a word for it that didn't sound insane coming out of a water treatment professional's mouth. What I did know was the engineering. Whatever this pathogen was, it traveled through bodily fluids. Blood, saliva, maybe more, and bodies leaking those fluids into soil, into drainage, into waterways that meant the raw water intake from Lake Morrow was a potential contamination vector. The lake was fed by Graves Creek, which ran through the western edge of town. If enough infected material reached the creek, reached the lake, reached my intake pipe, my 12 million gallons could become 12 million gallons of poison. On day 7, I pulled the intake valve closed. Full isolation from the raw source. Whatever I had in the clear wells was all I'd ever have. I did the math on a legal pad at the control room desk, the same desk where I'd calculated chemical dosing for 2 decades. At 1 gallon per day for one person, with a 10% safety margin for evaporation and sampling losses, 12 million gallons was effectively infinite. I could live here for the rest of my natural life and never run out. If I stayed alone. Day 12 changed everything. I was on the roof doing my morning scan when I spotted movement on the service road. 3 figures, moving slowly, one of them limping. I watched through the binoculars I'd taken from the maintenance supervisor's desk. Caldwell's binoculars, the nice Nikons he used for bird watching on his lunch break. Caldwell was probably dead now. The 3 figures moved wrong for infected, too coordinated, too purposeful. They were carrying things. Bags, a cooler. One of them had a rifle slung over his shoulder. They stopped at the gate. I watched one of them read the sign, Harrowfield Regional Water Treatment Facility, authorized personnel only. And then all 3 looked at each other. The one with the rifle pointed at the lock. The one who was limping shook his head and said something I couldn't hear. Then they moved on, continued down the service road, south toward Millhaven. My chest loosened. I hadn't realized I'd been holding my breath until they were gone. But they came back. 3 days later, on day 15. This time, there were 7 of them. If you're still with me on this one, tap subscribe because what happened next still keeps me awake. Now let me keep going. They made camp in the tree line about 200 yards south of my perimeter fence. I could see their fire at night, a stupid, suicidal fire that might as well have been a beacon, and hear their voices carrying in the still air. During the day, I watched them through Caldwell's binoculars. Mixed group. 2 women, 5 men. The limping man from before was there, his left leg wrapped in something dark and stiff. They had supplies, but not many. What they had was thirst. On day 16, one of them approached the fence. A tall man, maybe late 30s, with a shaved head and a denim jacket. He walked right up to the main gate and stood there, looking through the chain link at the plant buildings beyond. He cupped his hands around his mouth. "We know someone's in there." His voice was calm, reasonable. "We saw the generator exhaust. We're not looking for trouble. We have injured people. We need water." I was in the control room, watching on the one perimeter camera that still functioned. I didn't move, didn't respond. After 10 minutes, he walked back to the tree line. The next morning, he was at the fence again. Same spot, same calm voice. "My name is Everett Solis. I'm a firefighter, or I was. We came from the Ridgebrook shelter. It fell 4 days ago. We've been walking since. We have a man with a compound fracture going septic. We have a 16-year-old girl who hasn't had water in 36 hours. I'm asking you, one human being to another, for water." I stood at the control room window. He couldn't see me, the glass was tinted, reflective from outside. But I could see him clearly. The exhaustion cut into his face like old scars. The way he held himself still despite everything, the way his hands stayed open at his sides instead of balled into fists. The discipline of someone used to walking into burning buildings and staying composed. I thought about the math. 7 people at 1 gallon per day. 7 gallons out of 12 million. A rounding error. Less than what evaporated from the clear well surface in an hour. Giving them water cost me nothing. Giving them access cost me everything. I keyed the intercom at the main gate, the one we used to buzz in chemical delivery trucks. "I hear you." My voice through the speaker sounded alien, tinny and flat. "You can have water, but nobody comes inside the fence. I'll bring containers to the gate at sundown. You fill up and move on." His shoulders dropped. Relief or resignation, I couldn't tell. "Understood. Thank you." At sundown, I filled 4 5-gallon jugs from the nearest sampling tap and loaded them onto the electric maintenance cart. Drove to the gate, set them outside. They were already waiting. Everett, the tall denim jacket man. A short woman with steel-gray hair cut close to her skull, practical, no nonsense, the kind of haircut you give yourself with kitchen scissors. And the limping man, leaning on a makeshift crutch, his face the color of old wax. "That's 20 gallons, I said through the fence. "It'll hold you for 2 days if you're smart about it. When it's gone, you move south. There's a creek about 4 miles past Millhaven. I don't know if it's clean, but it's flowing." The gray-haired woman looked at me with eyes that had stopped being surprised by cruelty weeks ago. "You're going to send us out there with 20 gallons and a prayer." "I'm going to keep this facility secure." I stepped back from the fence. "This isn't a shelter. It's infrastructure." Everett put a hand on the woman's arm. "Bettina." Just her name, quiet. She closed her mouth. He looked at me through the chain link. 2 days. Can we stay in the tree line until then? We won't approach the fence again unless you say. I nodded once and drove the cart back to the operations building. That night, I lay on the cot I'd set up in the control room and stared at the ceiling and thought about my daughter, Cora, 23 years old, living in Portland. I hadn't spoken to her in 4 months before the collapse, not because of any dramatic falling out, but because of the slow erosion that happens when you let weeks become months, become silences you're always planning to break tomorrow. She'd texted me a photo of her cat in September. I'd meant to respond with something more than a thumbs-up emoji, but never did. Now the towers were dark. The satellites were drifting without ground control. And that thumbs-up was the last thing I'd ever said to my daughter. I gave them water again on day 18. Same arrangement. Jugs at the gate, sundown. But this time, the limping man wasn't there. I asked Everett about it. Tomas died this morning. Everett's voice was level, practiced, the voice of a man who delivered death notifications. The fracture went septic 2 weeks ago. We couldn't get antibiotics. I'm sorry. We buried him in the tree line. I need to ask you something, and I know the answer's probably no, but I have to ask. His wound was draining for days. We washed our hands in the creek water back near Ridgebrook. We don't know if any of us were exposed to whatever this is. If we were, how long until we know? I thought about it. The emergency broadcast had mentioned 72 hours. The woman on the radio had implied it was faster. If you've been together for 15 days and nobody's turned, you're probably clean. Probably. That's all I can give you. He nodded, picked up the jugs, walked back to the tree line. Day 19, day 20. I maintained my routine. Generator cycles, chlorine checks, perimeter scans. The group stayed in the tree line, visible but restrained. No fires at night anymore. Someone had talked sense into them. I watched them through the binoculars and felt something I hadn't felt since the early days of my divorce. The specific guilt of having enough when someone else doesn't. Day 21 is when the second group arrived. 11 people in 3 vehicles. 2 pickups and an SUV that came fast down the service road and skidded to a stop at my gate. No hesitation, no politeness. One of them got out with bolt cutters and started working on the chain link before the engines were off. I hit the intercom. Stop, right now. The man with the bolt cutters looked up at the speaker. Who the hell is in there? The person who controls 12 million gallons of drinking water and the only operational disinfection system in the county. Step away from my fence. I had no weapon. I had nothing. But my voice through that speaker was amplified, distorted, and utterly without warmth. And for a moment, it was enough. The man stepped back. A second man got out of the lead pickup, older, heavier, wearing what had once been an expensive jacket, and walked to the intercom. Listen, I'm Councilman Wardell Crisp. I served on the county utility board for 8 years. This facility is public property, and I have the authority to... You have the authority to stand outside my fence and ask politely. That's what you have. Do you know how many people are dying out there for lack of clean water? Do you understand what's happening in town? I have a pretty good idea, Councilman. Then open this gate. No. What happened next unfolded fast. Everett Solis emerged from the tree line alone, unarmed, hands visible, and walked toward the vehicles. I watched the whole thing through the perimeter camera, my hand hovering over the intercom button. Councilman? Everett's voice carried that deliberate steadiness. I'm going to suggest you take a step back from that fence. Crisp turned. "Who are you?" "Nobody important. But I've been here for a week, and the man inside that building isn't bluffing. He controls the water, all of it. And right now, he's the only thing between this facility and every desperate person within 20 miles. So what? We just die of thirst while one man sits on a... You negotiate." Everett cut him off cleanly. "Like adults. Or you cut that fence, and you find out what happens when word spreads that the water plant is open and undefended. How many people can this fence hold back? 500? 1,000? How fast will 12 million gallons disappear when there's no one left who knows how to keep it safe?" The silence that followed was the most important silence of my life. Because Crisp was thinking. And thinking was better than cutting. "The man inside will give you water," Everett continued. "I've seen him do it. But you don't get inside. Nobody does. That's the arrangement." Crisp looked at the fence, at the plant beyond, at the bolt cutters still in his companion's hand. Then he looked at Everett. "How much water?" I keyed the intercom. 40 gallons, once. Fill your containers and leave." It wasn't generous. I knew that. 40 gallons for 11 people was barely 3 days. But I couldn't afford to become a supply station. The moment I became a source, I became a target. Every additional person who knew what was inside these walls was a vector of threat. They took the water. They left. But Crisp looked back as the SUV pulled away, and the look on his face wasn't gratitude. It was inventory. He was mapping this place in his mind, calculating how to take it later. I knew he'd be back, and he wouldn't come alone. That night, I did something I'd been avoiding. I walked the perimeter inside, along the fence line, doing a full security assessment with fresh eyes. The razor wire was good. The chain link was industrial gauge, 10 feet high, anchored in concrete footers. But there were weaknesses. The chemical delivery entrance on the north side used a rolling gate with a simpler latch. The intake pipe access tunnel, a 3-foot diameter concrete conduit that ran underground from the lake, was sealed with a steel grating. But the grating bolts were corroded. The roof access hatch on the chemical building locked from inside, but the ladder rungs on the exterior wall couldn't be removed. I spent 2 hours that night welding the chemical gate's track to its housing. It would never open again. Then I climbed the exterior ladder of the chemical building and hacksawed through the bottom 6 rungs, dropping them into the weeds below. Anyone trying to climb would need to free climb 8 feet of smooth concrete block wall before reaching the remaining rungs. Not impossible, but loud, slow. Everett appeared at the fence the next morning. Alone. No request for water this time. "You know he'll come back with more people," he said without preamble. "I know. 20, maybe 30. Armed, desperate. Your fence won't hold against a coordinated push. I'm aware of the engineering limitations of a perimeter designed to keep out teenagers, not an assault force." He almost smiled. Almost. I was a battalion chief, Station 19, Ridgebrook. Before everything, I know a thing or two about defending fixed positions. Are you offering? I'm saying that 6 people in the trees with nothing but a hunting rifle and empty stomachs aren't much use to you. But 6 people with a reason to stay, with water, with walls, that's different. We watch your perimeter. We maintain security. You maintain the water. Everybody drinks. I leaned against the gatepost. The morning air was cold, carrying the faint chemical ghost of the sodium hypochlorite storage tanks. A smell like swimming pools and safety that I'd breathed for 19 years. If anyone in your group is infected, we're on day 18. Tomas was the only one with an open wound, and he's dead. Nobody else has symptoms. Nobody has been bitten scratched, or exposed to fluid transfer. You can't know that for certain. No, I can't. But I can tell you that if we leave, Crisp or someone like him will come back. And they won't stop at the fence. And you'll be alone inside 12 million gallons with no way to hold it. He was right. I hated that he was right. I'd been building my survival around isolation, one man, one plant, no variables. But variables were coming whether I invited them or not. Perimeter only, I said. You camp inside the fence line. There's space between the settling basins and the south wall. You get water from the sampling taps. You do not enter the operations building. You do not touch the controls. You do not approach the chemical storage. You work in shifts, 2 on watch at all times. And if anyone shows symptoms, they leave immediately. No discussion. Everett nodded. Terms accepted. I unlocked the gate. The 6 of them filed through like refugees crossing a border. Which, I suppose they were. Bettina, the gray-haired woman, looked at me as she passed. Didn't thank me, didn't glare, just assessed. I learned later she'd been a veterinary surgeon for 30 years. Her hands were the steadiest I'd ever seen on a person. The others, Everett's niece Yael, the 16-year-old, barely spoke but watched everything with a focused intensity that made me uncomfortable. A man named Connell, early 50s, former long-haul trucker who moved with the deliberate economy of someone used to tight spaces, and a couple Dawit and Miriam Eritrean immigrants who'd been on their way to Dawit's brother's house in Charlotte when the highways seized. They spoke to each other in Tigrinya and to us in careful, accented English that said more in fewer words than most native speakers managed. The arrangement worked. For a while. Everett organized watches with a military precision that put my own routines to shame. Connell turned out to be a practical genius. He rigged a rainwater collection system from tarps and guttering that gave us a supplementary supply without touching my Clearwell reserves. Bettina inventoried our medical supplies, essentially nothing, and started cataloging plants in the surrounding area she could use for basic antiseptic and anti-inflammatory purposes. She'd spent her career stitching up horses and dogs, but anatomy is anatomy, she told me. An infection kills the same way regardless of species. I kept the operations running. Generator maintenance, water quality checks, diesel rationing. I'd calculated that at our current consumption rate, the generator running 6 hours daily, we had fuel for another 41 days. After that, no power. No chlorination pumps, no lighting, no perimeter cameras. The water would still be there, but without treatment and monitoring. Biological contamination would begin within weeks. 41 days. Then the infrastructure becomes a concrete tomb full of slowly spoiling water. I didn't share this math with the others, not yet. Day 26 brought the first real test. Connell was on night watch when he radioed me. We'd set up the plant's old portable handhelds for internal communication and said, voice low, south fence, movement, multiple. I was in the control room. I pulled up the one functioning camera. In the grainy green of the infrared mode, I could see shapes. Not the coordinated movement of the living. Something else. Stuttered, uneven, stop and start. A cluster of figures 8, maybe 10, drifting along the outside of the south fence like leaves caught in a current that happened to flow past my walls. They weren't trying to get in. They weren't trying anything. They were just moving, drawn by something, the generator noise, maybe. The vibration, some residual instinct that made them gravitate toward the hum of machines. They pressed against the chain link in places, and the fence flexed but held. One of them, a woman in what had been a nurse's uniform, the fabric black with dried fluid, stood with her face pushed into the diamond mesh for 20 minutes without moving. Her jaw worked slowly, mechanically, like she was trying to remember how to speak. Nobody slept that night. By dawn, they drifted on, north, toward the Route 9 overpass. The fence had held, but Everett was beside me at first light, both of us looking at the spots where the chain link had stretched against the posts. "A dozen didn't get through," he said, "but they left stress points. Next time it's 50 or 100 funneled this direction by noise or light or just random drift. Those stress points become breach points." "What do you suggest?" "Kill the generator at night. Total blackout, total silence from sundown to sunup. Whatever we need power for, we do during daylight. That cuts our fuel consumption and extends our timeline," I admitted. "How long do we have on diesel?" I told him. 41 days had become 37. He absorbed it without visible reaction. "And after?" "After, the water treatment system goes manual. I can gravity feed from the clear wells through the sampling taps without power, but I can't run the chlorination pumps, which means I can't maintain residual disinfection, which means within 3 to 4 weeks of losing power, the stored water begins developing bacterial contamination from ambient sources, biofilm in the pipes, algae growth in the clear wells if sunlight penetrates through the access hatches. How do we fix that?" "We don't fix it. We mitigate it. We move to batch treatment. Smaller volumes, manually dosed with sodium hypochlorite. We have enough chemical stock for," I calculated in my head, "roughly 6 months of batch treatment for 7 people. 6 months. He said it like he was weighing it, turning it over in his hands. "After 6 months, we're drinking untreated water from sealed storage and hoping the contamination level stays below harmful thresholds, or we find another fuel source for the generator. Or we leave. Or we leave." Neither of us said anything else. He went to brief his people. I went to check chlorine residuals. Days 28 through 33 were what I think of as the functional period. Everyone had roles, routines, the illusion of normalcy that structure provides. Yael, the teenager, surprised me. She appeared at the control room door on day 29 and asked if she could learn how the plant worked. I said no. She came back the next day and said, "If you die, nobody else can run this system. That's a single point of failure. You taught me that you just said it to Everett." She'd been eavesdropping on my conversation. I should have been angry. Instead, I opened the door and showed her the SCADA displays, explained flow diagrams, walked her through basic chemistry. She absorbed information the way dry soil absorbs rain completely and without apparent effort. Within 3 days, she could read turbidity meters, calculate chlorine dosing, and identify every major valve in the system by number. She reminded me of Cora. Not in appearance, Cora was taller, fairer, louder, but in that specific intensity of a young mind that hasn't yet learned to be afraid of complexity. I'd tried to teach Cora things once. She'd been interested in everything at 16 and interested in nothing I offered by 20. The distance between us hadn't started with the divorce. It started when I stopped being fascinating to her and became merely present. I was teaching Yael because it was operationally necessary. That's what I told myself. Day 34. Councilman Crisp came back, but not the way I expected. He came alone, on foot. No vehicles, no entourage, no bolt cutters. He looked like he'd aged 20 years. His expensive jacket was gone, replaced by a torn flannel shirt. He walked to the gate and stood there, swaying slightly until Connell radioed me. I went to the fence. Crisp looked at me with eyes that had seen something I hadn't. "They took the school," he said without greeting. "The elementary school we'd set up there. 130 people. National Guard said they'd reinforce our position. Never came. They came through the gymnasium doors at 3 in the morning. The back hallway, the one with a fire exit that never locked properly. His voice broke. Not dramatically, just a clean fracture, like a bone giving way. How many got out? I asked. Maybe 20, scattered. I don't know where they went. I don't know where anyone went. Are you bitten? He blinked. What? Were you bitten? Scratched? Did any infected fluid contact your skin, eyes, mouth, open wound? No, I ran. I just ran. When? 2 days ago. 2 days. 48 hours of wandering, and he'd come back to the one place he knew had water. Had walls, had light. Everett appeared beside me. We exchanged a look. The same calculation. 1 more mouth, 7 more gallons per week. But also 1 more person who knew exactly what we had and where we were. 1 more person who'd told people how many people. About the water plant with the 1 man inside. Who did you tell? I asked, crisp. About this place, about the water. His jaw tightened. Everyone. I told everyone at the school. I told them there was a public facility being hoarded by 1 man and that we needed to take it back. The world went very quiet. How many of these people are still alive? Everett asked. I don't know. 20 got out. Maybe. Some of them knew the direction. The service road. So somewhere out there, an unknown number of desperate, traumatized survivors knew about my facility, knew it had water, knew the way here, and had been told it was theirs by right. And an unknown number of infected had just consumed the population of an elementary school shelter and might follow any fleeing survivors directly to my fence. I should have turned Crisp away. Strategically, logistically, his presence was a liability. He'd endangered us by spreading knowledge of this location. He'd tried to take this place by force once already. But he stood there, swaying in his torn shirt, and the look on his face was a look I'd seen in my own mirror on day 1, the look of a man who understands suddenly and completely that the world he built his identity in no longer exists. Inside, I said. Perimeter only. Same rules as everyone else. Everett said nothing, but his jaw worked in a way that told me he had plenty to say later. He did. That evening, in the operations corridor, out of Crisp's earshot. You realize he's a threat. He's a 58-year-old man who just watched 100 people die. He's a 58-year-old man who told 20 survivors where to find us. If even half of them come here, then we deal with that when it happens. When, not if. Everett, I spent 21 days alone in this building before you showed up. I made a decision then that I've been living with cutting off water to 43,000 people. I'm not going to pretend I have clean hands, but I'm also not going to start turning away the living because they might bring problems. He looked at me for a long time. You're a better man than I expected, he said finally. I hope that doesn't get us killed. If you're wondering what you would have done in that moment, whether you'd have let him in or turned him away, I'd genuinely like to know. Drop it in the comments. Because I'm still not sure I made the right call. Day 37. They came. Not 20, not 30. 9. 9 survivors from the school shelter, arriving in 1s and 2s over the course of 14 hours. Following the service road like a trail of breadcrumbs. Exhausted, dehydrated, terrified. A family of 4, father, mother, 2 boys under 10. An elderly man who'd been a custodian at the school. A woman carrying a sleeping bag and nothing else. 3 others whose faces I've mostly forgotten because of what happened next. I made a decision that went against every instinct I'd developed. I opened the gate, let them all in, gave them water, gave them space on the concrete apron between the settling basins, gave them the last of the emergency blankets from the maintenance building. Our population went from 8 to 17 overnight. Diesel consumption projections dropped from 33 days remaining to 22. Food, which had been barely adequate through Connell's foraging runs and Bettina's creative processing of whatever vegetation she deemed edible, became critical. 17 people need roughly 34,000 calories per day. We were producing maybe 8,000 through scrounging. But that wasn't the real problem. The real problem was the custodian, an old man named Faustin, who'd worked at the school for 30 years and had a deep scratch on his forearm that he said came from broken glass during the escape. Bettina examined it on day 38. She came to me afterward, her face neutral in that clinical way that meant bad news. "The wound margins," she said. "They're consistent with broken glass. Angular, clean entry, not tooth or nail marks. But there's discoloration around the edges I don't like. Grayish, spreading." "Infection?" "Bacterial infection looks different. I don't know what this is. It could be normal necrosis from inadequate wound care. It could be something else." "How long until we know?" "If it's conventional infection, antibiotics would help, and we don't have any. If it's the other thing from what I've observed in the field, behavioral changes present within 72 hours of fluid to blood transmission." "He's been with us for 24 hours. The scratch happened 2 days before that. So we're past the theoretical window. If he were going to turn, it should have happened already." Should. She met my eyes. "Medicine is not certainty, even in normal times. In these times, I have no diagnostic tools, no lab work, no imaging. I have my eyes and my 30 years of watching wounds, and my eyes are telling me something is wrong with that scratch." I asked her what she recommended. Isolation, not exile isolation. Put him somewhere contained, check him every 6 hours, and wait. If he's fine in 48 hours, we integrate him fully. It was the humane answer, the measured answer, the answer that balanced safety against compassion. I converted the chemical feed room, a small concrete space with a steel door and ventilation through a high grate, into a quarantine cell. Faustin went willingly when I explained it, even thanked me. "You're being careful," he said. "Careful is how you stay alive, I understand." I gave him a blanket, water, a battery lantern. Checked on him every 6 hours, as Bettina suggested. For 48 hours, he was fine. Lucid, calm, even good-humored. He told me about his grandchildren, twins, 7 years old, who'd been with their mother in Charleston when everything fell apart. He didn't know if they were alive. He said he'd given up trying to know things like that. Said the not knowing was actually easier than knowing. Hour 52. I opened the viewing slot in the steel door for my check. Faustin was sitting on the blanket with his back against the wall. He looked at me normally. "Morning," he said. "Morning. How's the arm?" He held it up. The discoloration had spread. The grayish tint now extended from his forearm to his elbow, visible even in the dim lantern light. But his eyes were clear. His voice was steady. "Hurts less than yesterday," he said. Which is strange, isn't it? Wounds that are getting better hurt less. But wounds that are dying also hurt less. I didn't know what to say to that. Hour 60. I opened the slot. Faustin was standing in the center of the room, facing the door. Not moving, just standing. His arms hung at his sides, and his head was tilted at a slight angle, as though he was listening to something below the threshold of my hearing. Faustin? His eyes tracked to me, slowly, like a camera on a broken gimbal. I can hear the water, he said. Through the walls, through the floor. I can hear it moving. He shouldn't have been able to hear anything. The chemical feed room was separated from the nearest water conduit by 3 feet of reinforced concrete. Nothing was audible through those walls. I think you should rest, I said. It's so much water, he whispered. So much, and it's so still, like it's waiting. I closed the slot, found Everett, found Bettina. The 3 of us stood in the corridor and had the conversation nobody wanted to have. He's turning, Bettina said flatly. Slow onset. The 72-hour window isn't universal. It might depend on the route of exposure, the individual's immune response, the viral load in the contaminating fluid. He might have been exposed to a smaller amount enough to start the process, but not enough for rapid conversion. What do we do? Everett asked. Nobody answered for a long time. He's behind a steel door, I said finally. He can't get out. We wait. We observe. If he turns fully... When? Bettina said. When he turns fully. Look at the progression. This isn't stopping. When he turns fully, he'll be contained. And then what? Everett pressed. We can't leave an active infected locked in a room inside our facility indefinitely. The noise alone the others will know. The family with the 2 children will know there's one of those things 6 rooms away from where their kids are sleeping. Then we kill him, I said. And the words came out of my mouth with a flatness that scared me more than anything outside the fence ever had. Hour 70. I opened the slot for the last time. Faustin was pressed against the door. His face filled the narrow rectangle of the viewing window. The gray had reached his neck, climbing his skin like frost on glass. His eyes were open, but the intelligence behind them was guttering like a candle in wind. His mouth moved. Sound came out. Oren. My name, in a voice like dried leaves. I can feel it happening. I know what's happening to me. Please, while I'm still me, please don't let me become, please. My hand was on the door, on the steel. I could feel the cold of it through my palm. On the other side, a man who'd spent 30 years mopping floors and helping children find lost lunchboxes was asking me, with the last coherent breath of his human mind, to end it. I didn't have a gun. I didn't have a knife that would work through a steel door. What I had was the chemical feed system that this room was built to house. Sodium hypochlorite at full concentration industrial bleach. 12% was lethal in enclosed spaces. The feed line still ran through this room, sealed but accessible through the manual valve on the wall. I could flood the room with chlorine gas. It would be fast. It would be contained. It would be the most clinical, cowardly, efficient mercy I could offer. I opened the valve, walked away from the door, stood in the corridor with my hand against the wall, and listened to the sound of pressurized liquid hitting concrete. Heard coughing, then silence. I didn't tell the others what I'd done. I told them he'd turned and the containment held. Bettina looked at me with those veterinary surgeon eyes, and I knew she knew. She'd euthanized hundreds of animals. She recognized the particular stillness of a man who'd just done it for the first time. Everett asked if the body was a contamination risk. I told him the chlorine concentration in that room would have killed every pathogen, every cell, every microorganism within minutes. I told him the truth, which was also the lie. It's sterile in there now. The days after Faustin were the hardest, not because of external threat. The fence held. The infected drifted past. Our routines continued. Hard because I couldn't stop thinking about the valve, about how easy it had been, how mechanical. I'd operated that system for 19 years. Turning a valve was muscle memory. But this time, what flowed wasn't disinfection for a community. It was death for one man who'd asked for it. I started sleeping less, eating less. The others noticed. Miriam left food outside the control room door, small offerings, carefully portioned from our dwindling stores. I ate them because wasting food was obscene, but I couldn't taste anything. Day 41. The diesel ran out at 3 in the afternoon. The generator sputtered, coughed twice, and went silent. That specific silence again, the one I'd heard on day 1. A system holding its breath. We transitioned to manual operations, gravity feed from the clear wells through the sampling taps. Batch chlorination using the procedure I developed and taught to Yael. Measured doses into portable containers, contact time of 30 minutes. Residual verification using the DPD test kit. We could sustain this for months. But without power, we had no perimeter cameras, no lighting, no intercom, no electric locks on the main gate. Those failed to a locked position, which was the correct failure mode. But it meant we couldn't remotely buzz anyone, in or out. Everything became manual, physical, human. And humans make mistakes. Day 45. The night Dawit disappeared, Miriam woke screaming at 2 in the morning, a sound I hoped to never hear again. A sound that came from somewhere below language. Dawit's sleeping space beside her was empty. His shoes were gone. The south gate, the one I'd welded shut weeks ago, showed fresh tool marks on the surrounding fence, where someone had cut a person-sized flap in the chain link and bent it outward. He'd left, voluntarily. In the middle of the night, alone, into the dark, Miriam told us through Everett's halting translation, her English had deteriorated under stress, reverting to Tigrinya in her grief that Dawit had been talking about his brother in Charlotte for days, saying the highways might be clear by now, saying they could make it if they moved fast. She'd told him it was suicide. He'd agreed. And then he'd left anyway. We never found out what happened to him. Miriam stopped eating for 2 days. On the 3rd day, she resumed mechanically, as though she'd made a decision about living that required fuel regardless of desire. I patched the fence with wire and a prayer. Day 50. The morning Yael ran into the control room with wild eyes and said, "There's something wrong with the clear well." I followed her to clear well 2, the larger of our 2 storage basins, a concrete rectangle the size of a swimming pool, covered by a heavy concrete lid with access hatches every 20 feet. She pointed at hatch 7. Water was seeping around the seal, just a trickle, a thin sheet of wetness on the concrete surface. But it shouldn't have been there. Clear well water level was well below the hatch elevation. For water to reach the hatches, something was raising the level inside. I opened hatch 7, looked down into the clear well with my flashlight. The beam hit water closer to the surface than it should have been. 6 inches below the hatch opening, when it should have been 4 feet. And on the surface, floating, bumping gently against the concrete walls with the microcurrents of thermal convection bodies. 3 of them. Face down, arms spread, drifting. Someone had gotten into my clear well. The realization hit like ice water down my spine. The access hatches locked from outside, simple padlocks, not complex security. Someone had opened a hatch, introduced 3 bodies into our primary water storage, and closed it again. The water level had risen because 3 adult human bodies displaced roughly 15 cubic feet of water. Contamination. Intentional contamination of our only water supply. I sealed clear well 2 immediately. Rerouted all draw to clear well 1. The smaller basin, 3 million gallons. which I hadn't opened or accessed since isolation. If it was uncompromised, we still had water. If someone had gotten to that one, I physically ran across the plant grounds to clear well 1. Checked every hatch, every padlock, every seal. All intact, all locked. I sagged against the concrete wall and breathed for what felt like the first time in minutes. But clear well 2 was gone. 9 million gallons, poisoned. Rendered not just bacterially unsafe, but psychologically impossible. Nobody would drink water that had floated dead bodies. And whoever had done this had been inside our perimeter, inside our fence, with access to our infrastructure. Everett assembled everyone. 17 people standing in the gray morning light between the settling basins, their faces running the spectrum from confused to terrified. He asked the question simply, "Who opened the Clearwell hatch last night?" Silence. Shifting weight, eyes avoiding eyes. "The south fence was cut once already," he continued. "Someone got in from outside, or someone inside let them in. Either way, we've lost 9 million gallons of drinking water. We're now operating on 3 million. At our current population, that's..." He looked at me. 600 days, I said. If nothing else goes wrong, if we maintain treatment protocols, if nobody else contaminates the supply. 600 days. Everett let that settle. That's survivable. If we can trust each other. If we can't, it was crisp. Connell's voice low and certain. He's been talking to people through the fence at night. I've seen him. North side, past midnight. Talking to someone outside. Every head turned to Crisp. The former councilman stood at the edge of the group, his face unreadable. "Is that true?" Everett asked. Crisp's jaw worked. "I spoke to survivors, people I knew from the shelter. They were outside the fence, dying of thirst. I told them where the access hatches were. I told them that there was enough water for everyone if we just... You told people how to poison our drinking water." My voice came out colder than I intended, colder than I felt. "You showed them exactly how to destroy what's keeping us alive. I showed them how to access water you were hoarding. 12 million gallons for 17 people while hundreds die outside. 9 million of those gallons are now toxic. They put bodies in it. Your survivors put corpses in our water. Was that the plan? Was that your idea of sharing?" His face crumbled. "No, I didn't. They weren't supposed to. I just told them about the hatches. I didn't know they'd get out." The words came from Bettina, not from me. She stepped forward, her steady surgeon's hands curled into fists at her sides. "Get out of this facility before I do something I'll need to forgive myself for." Crisp looked around the group. Found no allies, no sympathy. Even the family with the children who he'd ostensibly been advocating for. All those faceless, suffering masses looked at him with the specific contempt reserved for a man whose good intentions have destroyed something irreplaceable. I opened the gate. He walked through. I closed it behind him and didn't watch which direction he went. We reinforced every Clearwell hatch that afternoon. Welded padlocks, added chains. Yale and I tested Clearwell 1 residual chlorine, turbidity, coliform presence. Clean, uncompromised. 3 million gallons between 17 people and death. The math was different now. 3 million gallons divided by 17 people at 1 gallon per day, with treatment losses, gave us roughly 480 days. A year and change. Long enough for what? Rescue, recovery, the collapse of whatever was left of civilization into something new. I sat in the control room that night and thought about valves, about what I controlled and what I didn't, about the 43,000 people I'd cut off on day 1, about Faustine's last words, about Dawit walking into the dark, about Cora in Portland, probably dead, and the last thing between us was a thumbs-up emoji. I pulled out the legal pad, the same one I'd used for every calculation since day one, and I wrote something that wasn't math. It was 3 sentences, an admission I couldn't speak out loud, but needed to exist somewhere. I chose this building over every human connection in my life. It kept me alive. I am not sure those are the same thing. Day 53. The morning I found Yael in the control room, running calculations I hadn't assigned her. She looked up when I entered, and her face had the specific look of a young person who has discovered a problem they're not sure they should share. "The batch treatment protocol," she said. "I've been tracking our sodium hypochlorite consumption against the remaining stock. You said we had 6 months at our current population." "Roughly?" "We don't. We have 4 months. Because the concentration in the tanks has degraded sodium hypochlorite, loses potency over time, especially in heat. The stock that's been sitting in the chemical building since before the collapse has already lost 20 to 30% of its available chlorine. We need to dose higher to achieve the same residual, which means we use more, which means 4 months?" I sat down heavily. "Then what?" "Then we're drinking untreated water. And from what I can see in the Clearwell 1 test results, there's already algal growth starting on the interior walls. Without active treatment, that accelerates. Within weeks of losing chemical stock, we're looking at potential bacterial contamination. 4 months, not 600 days. 4 months until the thing that had kept us alive, clean water, the one advantage I'd built everything around, stopped being reliably safe." I looked at this girl, this 16-year-old who'd learned in 3 weeks what took most operators a year. And I saw, with absolute clarity, that she was the future of this place, not me. I was the past. I was the man who'd known how to run the system when the system existed. She was the one who'd figure out what came next. "We need to find more chemical stock," I said. "Or an alternative treatment method." "UV sterilization," she said immediately. "If we can find solar panels enough to power a UV treatment array, we don't need chemicals at all. Ultraviolet light at 254 nanometers destroys nucleic acids and pathogens. It's standard technology. You've been reading the technical manuals. There's nothing else to read." I almost smiled. Almost. On day 55, Everett and Connell made the first supply run in 3 weeks. Looking for solar panels, batteries, anything electrical. They were gone for 9 hours, came back with bruised faces, empty hands, and a story about encountering a fortified position 2 miles south. Survivors with guns who'd claimed everything in a half-mile radius as their territory. "There's a world out there," Everett reported that evening, all of us gathered in the space between the settling basins. Pockets of people, organized, territorial, armed, some trading, some not. The infected are thinning in the open areas, they're congregating in the denser zones, the towns, the places with more bodies. Out here, in the rural stretches, it's mostly human threat now. "Did you see any infrastructure intact?" I asked. "There's a solar farm industrial scale about 7 miles east, off Route 9, past the overpass. Fenced, guarded by a group that's using the panels to power their compound. They weren't interested in trading. 7 miles. 7 miles through open ground with scattered hostile groups and no vehicle. We need those panels." "I know. So what do we do?" Everett looked at me in the fading light. The lines around his eyes had deepened since I'd first seen him at the fence. "We do what humans have always done when they need something they can't take by force. We find something they need more, and we trade." The answer was obvious. So obvious I couldn't believe it took me 55 days to see it. We had water. 3 million gallons of clean, treated water in a world where clean water was worth more than ammunition, more than food, more than fuel. We'd been sitting on a currency, the most fundamental currency of survival, and hoarding it behind welded gates, while the rest of the world died of thirst. I'd been thinking like a man protecting a building. It was time to think like a man running a resource. We open trade, I said. Water for supplies, controlled amounts, measured exchanges. We become the water source for this entire region. Not a shelter, not a charity, a utility. Bettina raised an eyebrow. You spent 5 weeks keeping everyone out. I spent 5 weeks keeping the water safe. It's safe. Now it needs to be worth something more than keeping 17 people alive until the chemicals run out. The transition took a week to organize. Everett established contact with 3 nearby survivor groups through careful, patient diplomacy, the kind only a man who'd spent a career walking into other people's worst days could manage. Terms were simple. 5 gallons of clean water for measurable goods. Solar panels, batteries, fuel, antibiotics, tools, food. No weapons, we didn't want to become an arms depot. No entry beyond the gate, all exchanges happened at the fence. The first trade was 10 gallons for a 12-volt deep-cycle battery and 3 cans of propane. The second was 20 gallons for a 50-watt solar panel and a length of copper wire. By day 62, we had enough photovoltaic capacity to run a small UV sterilization unit that Yael designed from the plant's technical manuals and salvaged components. The water treatment plant became exactly what it was always meant to be. A utility, not owned by me, not hoarded, operated. The thing I'd spent 19 years doing, keeping water safe and flowing, I was doing again. Just at a different scale, under different rules, for a different world. Everett ran security. Bettina ran medical, such as it was. Connell managed logistics and trade negotiations. Miriam, silent and efficient, maintained the physical plant with a precision that needed no language. And Yael became my successor. The operator who would keep this place running long after I was gone. Day 68. The evening I climbed the chemical storage building for my regular roof scan, I saw something on the distant overpass. A figure standing among the abandoned cars, facing my direction. Too far for details even with Caldwell's binoculars. Just a human shape, standing still, watching. The figure raised one arm, held it there, then turned and disappeared among the vehicles. A wave, just a wave, from a stranger on a dead highway. It might have meant nothing. It might have meant everything. I raised my arm, held it there, felt the evening air cool against my palm. Then I climbed down and went to check the chlorine residuals. Because that's what I do. That's what I've always done. I keep the water clean. I keep the system running. And now, the system is bigger than concrete and pipes and chemistry. The system is everyone who drinks from these walls. Everyone who trades at the gate. Everyone who knows that 3 miles down a service road, behind a razor wire fence, a man with 19 years of practice is keeping something vital alive. I still think about the valve I opened for Faustin. I still think about the 43,000 people I cut off on day 1. I still don't know if Cora is alive. I still don't know if what I did, all of it, from the first isolation protocol to the trading post we've become, was right. But the water is clean. The water is flowing. And for now, in this world, that has to be enough.